Talking government procurement with a crazy bill called
Welcome back to your home for hot topics, hot crazy bids, and at least in this episode, mailbag. I'm Bill Colhane alongside Tony Callis. We thank you very much for giving a listen to the Big Bid Theory. Here's the menu. We've heard back from a couple listeners, and we'll sort through our mailbag. Dr. Michael White, Arizona State University's director of their PhD program in Criminology and Criminal Justice, stops by to talk about law enforcement and government agency use of body-worn cameras. More on that. And actually, Dr. White, he even shares his thoughts regarding the future on BWCs. Tony, meanwhile, and this is kind of a tease for a future episode, Tony has a crazy bids recap involving the DEA. Yikes. Tony, we have a full slate, my friend. Welcome to the show. Say hello to our audience and tell our listeners what's been going on in your life.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Basically, we're just staying busy here at Bid Prime, obviously working with our clients to get them more business.
That's right. You have a day job, don't you? You're not just a podcaster.
That's right. Just trying to truck along and make sure that we're bringing in more and more business every day for Bid Prime and our clients.
Yeah, good words indeed. Now, Tony, some folks who listened to the last episode remember you were kind of under the weather. It sounds like you've recovered from your California potentially induced cough. And stop it right there, people. This isn't a political podcast. Don't want to talk too much about coughs, but again, you're looking chipper.
Yeah, thank you. It's just from what the doctors told me, I think a little bit of the wildfires out there definitely made me congested and affected me. So definitely the fresh air here in Texas helped me out, and I'm back to normal.
All right. Well, folks, ring the bells, blow the air horns. We really need to find a special effects guru, Lauren, behind the glass. It's time for mailbag. Tony, Jenny, a listener from Portland, Oregon, wants to know if you and I like animals, have any pets. I know you do. I do as well, but you have a really special story.
Yeah, actually, I've got Argos. He's 6 years old. He's a mixed American bulldog. Actually, he was born fully bilaterally deaf. Unfortunately, found that out. Well, not unfortunate that I found it out, but it's unfortunate that he's deaf. Found that out about 8 weeks into having him, and it's pretty cool. Definitely taught him some simple sign language. He caught on after 2 years of full training, and I love him to death. He's part of the family and a best friend. He's awesome.
He is. To see Tony's pup, by the way, Argos, go to the Big Bid Theory Facebook page for a pic of what we're calling the TBBT mascot now. Another of our esteemed listeners, this is from Bob, from up and over in Lowell, Massachusetts. He asked what a person has to do, who to contact to be a guest on the show. Bob, us. You can reach us through email. We always give the details on our email at the end of the show, and also you can reach out to us on Twitter as well. And if you have a story to tell, if you're an expert or somebody who has a lot of information, a lot of knowledge about a particular topic that we feel would be meaningful to a majority of our listeners, who knows? Bob, maybe you could be the next special guest here on TBBT. So thanks for the emails. If yours didn't make the cut, many apologies. Who knows? Maybe next time Tony and I will address your question and or concern. Speaking of questions and concerns, Ferguson, Baltimore, Charleston, Chicago, the list goes on. Use of body-worn cameras has, of course, been an enormous topic of discussion and debate in this country. Heck, even we've done a couple of reports and an industry analysis video on that subject. Acknowledging our limited understanding, even though, again, we've done some research, we decided let's bring in an expert on the subject to get their take. What's going on with body-worn cameras? Well, we scored big time. Dr. Michael White, again, a professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Arizona State, will join us briefly. And look at Dr. White's background. He has an interesting perspective, having served as a deputy sheriff in Pennsylvania before his career in higher education. Dr. White is a nationally recognized author, studies law enforcement, including use of force, training, and misconduct. Among innumerable destinations, he's been published, look at this, Tony, he's been published in Justice Quarterly, Criminal Justice and Behavior, Criminology and Public Policy, and Crime and Delinquency. Notably as well, he's a valued resource for the U.S. Department of Justice. Here's our discussion on body-worn cameras with Dr. Michael White. Dr. White, welcome again, and thank you for sharing your expertise with our audience. Again, we thank you very much for joining us on the Big Bid Theory.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
let's get right to it, Dr. White. Since we first started reporting on the body-worn camera industry, and I go all the way back to January of 2015, pretty much everyone, of course, has seen the significant rise in news coverage, the outcry for its use, and therefore the corresponding increase in implementations in the U.S. As a matter of fact, I guess it was about 5 or 6 months ago, we identified a 323% rise in the number of body-worn camera solicitations, and I'm talking about from the year 2014 to 2015. So let's start here, Dr. White. In your opinion, what are the basic benefits in law enforcement and other government entities, for that matter, putting to use deploying body-worn camera technology? Why do it?
Well, I think, one thing before I get to the benefits, I think the primary reason we're seeing this really tremendous increase in interest and adoption is that this has been a perfect storm in terms of lots of stakeholders with different competing interests all agreeing, at least in principle, that this is a good idea. You have the police leadership groups like the International Association of Chiefs of Police. You've got the ACLU, the federal government, and even most police associations. So everybody has their own agendas about why they think it's a good idea, but they all seem to agree, at least in principle, that officers should be wearing cameras. And that gets us to why that might be, and it's really about some of the perceived benefits that you just asked about, and there's a wide range of benefits that at least potentially can come when officers start wearing cameras. Some of them have some pretty robust evidence to support, and others are more speculative at this point. So one of the big benefits that does have some evidence to support it is the notion that when a chief makes an announcement that his or her department is going to deploy cameras, it represents a show of transparency. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a chief holding a press conference and essentially making that claim that we've got nothing to hide. We want to show you, the citizens, that we've got nothing to hide. So we're gonna start wearing these cameras. The other big perceived benefit involves what I call a potential civilizing effect. That is the notion that you have a camera there during a police-citizen encounter can positively influence the behavior of both of those participants, both the citizen and the officer. And there have been a fair number of studies that have shown after police start wearing cameras that you see sizable reductions in use of force by police and also citizen complaints by police. Not every study has shown that, but the majority of studies have documented fairly sizable declines in those two really important outcomes, use of force and complaints. The third benefit is evidentiary. It's pretty clear to me that this technology has evidentiary value. It captures audio and video that can be used to resolve citizen complaints. It can be used as evidence in prosecutions. For example, there was a study done here with the Phoenix Police Department that showed the availability of body-worn camera video and audio led to enhanced processing of domestic violence cases. More likely the prosecutor would file charges, more likely that you were going to get a guilty plea or a conviction. So those are three big benefits. Another benefit, one that's drawing a little bit of controversy, is the potential for the technology to serve as an accountability tool or an accountability check on officers. That is, it's capturing what police officers are doing that are out in the field, and the department should be able to review that evidence and that video to determine whether officers are acting appropriately or inappropriately. It can even be used as a performance measurement tool. So that departments are struggling a little bit, particularly as they negotiate this with their unions about how the technology can be used as an accountability check. So those are the primary benefits, though, that I see.
My background, my research into this topic is very small, clearly compared to the work that you've done. But you mentioned that there's a preponderance of positive, good reasons for the technology to be used. A vast majority of groups, organizations, people I've been in contact with, I've read about, are for it. However, there is a group, people who are against the use of body-worn cameras. So if you could kind of flip the script there a little bit, Dr. White, what are the concerns about the technology, and who have you heard most notably who's against the use of body-worn cameras?
There are a couple of challenges that are associated with the adoption of body-worn cameras. The big one is cost. The units themselves, there have to be more than 50 different companies now that make this technology. So there's a wide range of choices, and there's a wide range, I think, also in the quality. But generally speaking, the hardware is not the expensive part. The expensive part comes on the back end when a department has to figure out how to manage the vast amount of data that's generated, and it has to be managed and stored securely. And some departments have struggled with how they're going to pay for that, and that's particularly for smaller agencies, that represents a significant barrier to overcome the cost. And it's not just the cost to start the program. Like I said, it's the cost to continue it and to manage it well. There are privacy concerns as well. As I said, the ACLU has come out and in principle, that they support the use of this technology by police. But they have a model policy, and if you read that model policy, they have some real concerns about citizens' privacy, the expectation of privacy, and the potential for this technology to violate that privacy. So there's some issues there that have to be dealt with, particularly with regard to sensitive populations like victims, like children, the mentally ill. What happens if an officer has to go into an emergency room? There are HIPAA considerations as well. So there's a wide range of privacy issues to be addressed. And then last, just recently, there's been if you follow the Boston case at all, the Boston Police Department had decided to roll out a pilot study of body-worn camera program, or a pilot study of body-worn cameras, and the Boston Police Department union actually filed for an injunction in federal court to stop the leadership from implementing that program. And there have been cases where police unions have resisted this, and generally, the concerns really revolve around, how the technology is going to be used to check up on officers. Are there concerns about how it's going to change citizen behavior and things like that? So I believe a lot of the line level concerns, the union concerns, can be addressed if all the parties sit down and start a discussion at the very start of the planning process, and you can work your way through some of the issues. And I think that's not happened in many places, and as a result, a union or line officers feel like this is being forced upon them, and the position that they'll take is that this is something that needs to be negotiated as part of a collective bargaining agreement. You can't force us to wear this technology.
Let me ask you this, Dr. White. You worked in law enforcement from your days in the Keystone State there in Pennsylvania. Put yourself in the situation of those in law enforcement today. Would you have worn a body-worn camera?
I was a deputy sheriff back in the early 90s, which was certainly pre-body-worn camera, but it was also pre-smartphone. So, I didn't have to worry about those types of things. If I was in law enforcement today, I think I'd be thrilled to wear a body-worn camera, because the fact of the matter is that policing involves dealing with people who are upset and who are angry and who may file a complaint against you, even though you've done nothing wrong. And pre-body-worn camera, many of those complaints could not be resolved because there would be no evidence one way or the other to provide evidence that the allegation was true or not. And one of the benefits of body-worn cameras is that it can capture what actually happens, and it more times than not will provide the necessary documentation to show that a complaint is not true or that it's frivolous. And I see that as a big deal. It's a protection against frivolous and untrue complaints that can be filed against an officer.
Admittedly limited research I've done on this, and law enforcement folks, friends of mine, I'm for it, and the people, small group that I interact with, they're pro body-worn cameras as well for the reasons you pointed out.
If you're just joining us, we have Dr. Michael White from Arizona State University here with us on the Big Bid Theory. Dr. White, what are some misconceptions the public, law enforcement, and others may have about body-worn camera technology and its use?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that the camera will always capture exactly what happened. That there's this notion that it's almost like you're watching the TV show Cops, where you're going to have a movie crew there, a television crew, and it's going to have a perfect shot of exactly what happened. And that's a misconception, because remember, this is a device that's actually worn, on the uniform. It could be worn in a variety of different places, but it may not catch exactly what happened. There may be an obstructed view. The officer may forget to turn the camera on. if there's a struggle, the camera may fall off. If you've ever watched a body-worn camera video of a foot pursuit, I mean, you get dizzy in a hurry. So, one of the misconceptions, I think, particularly as this is going to be evidence that's used in criminal trials, is that juries are going to have to understand that it's not going to be an absolutely perfect record of what happened based on, just the limitations of how this technology works. So I think that's probably one of the biggest misperceptions. And then the other is that I think we're seeing nationally kind of almost an expectation that police officers are going to start to wear these cameras. I mentioned the Boston Police Department. There was a news story coming out of Boston, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, where the commissioner said that, essentially he said, we don't have the problems that are occurring in Baltimore and Ferguson, so we don't really need body-worn cameras. But the pressure, among, I think, the citizens of Boston in a period of just a couple of months caused the commissioner to have to change his mind on that. And as I said, they're moving now toward a pilot program with body-worn cameras. So there's a couple of the misperceptions that I see.
Those are excellent points. And while implementation and use has grown exponentially over recent years, what is holding back the remaining law enforcement and other public sector organizations?
I think part of it is the cost that I mentioned, and there are upfront costs. So a department has to figure out to either to get a grant. The federal government, for example, has a funding program that agencies can apply for to get funding for body-worn cameras, or you have to go to your city council or your mayor and get it built into your budget. So certainly cost is one of the concerns. The other is that some police departments are just they're being slow and deliberate and cautious, and in a lot of ways I think that's probably the correct approach. You have to figure out, if you're the chief of police, why you want to do this. What is the goal of my department adopting body-worn cameras? And once I've got that figured out, then I need to make sure I go through a thorough, a deliberate, and a collaborative planning process so that when officers start wearing cameras down the road, there are no surprises. Engaged with all the relevant internal groups in my organization, as well as the external stakeholders, and I've got everyone on board and I've addressed everyone's concerns. That takes time. I know in Ferguson, for example, the officers in Ferguson began wearing body-worn cameras less than 30 days after Michael Brown was killed, and there was simply no way that they could have gone through a process that was thorough, deliberate, cautious, and collaborative. And the bottom line is that if you roll out this technology, if you haven't planned well, you could actually do more harm than good with this technology.
Great points, Dr. White. And one thing that you've touched upon a few times during our conversation is the cost. While maybe a big city, Chicago, Boston, Baltimore, St. Louis, Los Angeles, maybe they have the funds or can come up with the funds to implement a body-worn camera program. I think you make a great point. For maybe that local city police department or that township, their police department, maybe it's not so easy to come up with the money, not just for the hardware, as you pointed out, but then also on the back end as far as storage and those considerations. That's not always easy for a smaller public sector entity to write the check for.
Yeah, I mean, that's the case, and there are certainly smaller agencies. There's things that they can do to minimize some of the costs. Like I said, the primary cost is in the management of the data. So you can set retention schedules for how long data will be maintained, and the shorter, and some of this is dictated by state law, particularly if it's evidence for an arrest or a felony case. But you can set shorter retention periods for video that doesn't capture anything, where there's no arrest or anything like that. And as you shorten the retention, that means you're holding on to the data for a shorter period of time, and that's going to reduce the cost. Some of the larger agencies have managed the cost by not rolling out all of the cameras at the same time. So for example, the Phoenix Police Department, they have over 3,000 sworn officers, and they started small. They started with 50 officers in one precinct, and now they're going to 150 officers citywide. So they're working their way up. The other thing we need to keep in mind is that it is very easy to calculate the costs associated with this technology. How much does each unit cost? How much is it going to cost me per month for data? It's much more difficult to calculate the benefits. How do you calculate, fewer lawsuits and fewer civil judgments and fewer citizen complaints? How do you calculate the benefit of enhanced legitimacy because citizens feel better now that officers are wearing cameras? So I think you have to come to this with a kind of a long view as well, and not just think about the immediacy of what it's going to cost me. You have to think of the long term of how it's going to benefit not only my agency but the relationship between my agency and the citizens.
Maybe a point that doesn't come out often enough, whether it be through mainstream media or whatever organization has a platform, but just the confidence of the citizenry when it comes to the interaction and relationship with law enforcement. I think you touch on a good point there, Dr. White. So that gets us caught up to current day. Whenever we have a guest on the show, Dr. White, we like to ask them to kind of pull out the crystal ball, so to speak. And on that note, and by the way, you can take us in any direction you so choose. What is your prediction on the future of body-worn camera technology? If we were to have a conversation 5, 10, 20 years from now, what would we be talking about?
I really believe that the train has left the station. I know there's some resistance now in certain pockets, but I think that probably in 5 years from now, we won't even be talking about body-worn cameras. It's just going to be a routine part of policing in the United States. But I also think that there are wrinkles to this that are going to have to be worked out. There is some concern, especially among human and civil rights groups, that there may be a marriage between body-worn cameras and facial recognition software. There's also that would be one of the major concerns. There's also a lot of concerns now about officers not activating the camera, not turning it on. So now some of the vendors are looking for mechanisms in which the activation occurs automatically. So, for example, if an officer switches on the lights of a car, of his or her patrol car, the camera comes on automatically. Or if an officer touches his or her firearm or taser, the camera comes on automatically. So I think that there's going to continue to be some developments technologically that enhance the use of the cameras. But like I said, I think that 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about something else. It's not going to be body-worn cameras because the public demand is there, the federal support is there. Like I said at the beginning, that this perfect storm, and there's some variation in people's agendas, but for the most part, everyone feels like this is a good idea. So I think we'll continue to move in that direction.
Well, Dr. White, on behalf of Tony and everybody with the show, we do want to thank you again for your insight and thoughts on this hot topic impacting everybody listening to the show. You don't have to be in law enforcement. You don't have to be a company dealing in body-worn cameras. It certainly, again, I think will resonate with all of our listeners.
All right. My pleasure. I'm happy to chat with you.
Thank you, Dr. White, very much.
So there are some cons, right? There are some privacy concerns. Funding will always be an issue, and not, of course, just regarding body-worn cameras. Pros, in my opinion, there are too many to list. And we threw out the number, 323% rise in use of the cameras from the years 2014 to 2015. I can't wait to see what 2016 looks like. Tony, Dr. White hit it. The train has indeed left the station. Body-worn cameras are here to stay.
Yes, and I couldn't be happier, honestly. I think it's a plus on both parties' ends, to the public and for law enforcement.
So many thanks to Dr. White. Talk about a segue. We go from body-worn cameras and head into crazy bids land. Many of our longtime listeners recall that we've touched on the subject of legalization of marijuana in the U.S. because governments throughout the U.S. are involved in varying degrees when it comes to marijuana. Everybody knows it's in the news now. And of course, the DEA is front and center in any dialogue and research regarding the subject. Tony, you and the staff came across a solicitation from the DEA that qualifies for crazy bids.
It is, and it's for the packaging, removal, and destruction of Drug Enforcement Agency controlled substances. But why the heck are we outsourcing that and sending them overseas? Why can't we handle that here in the great USA? I don't understand. Crazy bid indeed.
Crazy bids, and just a little bit more about it. And this comes from, of course, the solicitation itself. The contractor shall provide all management tools, supplies, equipment, labor, and applicable licenses and permits necessary to ensure that waste removal and disposal services are performed at William S. Middleton Memorial Veterans Hospital. All waste removal shall be performed in such a manner as to be least disruptive to hospital operations, and on and on. So there you have it, Tony. As far as the all-time ranking in crazy bids. That one's kind of up there. Again, much appreciation to Dr. White. By the way, where do you stand on body-worn cameras? We'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for downloading, sharing, and following The Big Bid Theory. You can contact me at bculhane@bidprime.com. Tony is tcallis@bidprime.com. On Twitter, we go by @TheBigBidTheory. My Twitter is contract_hunter. Tony is @Anthony Callis. Please don't forget to like our evolving Facebook page. And again, go by our Facebook page and check out Argos's picture. Headed to the University of Arkansas for an engagement this weekend. Guess I'll hear some calling of the hogs up there in Fayetteville. By the way, man, I love bacon. Do you love bacon?
Who doesn't?
We'll return in 2 weeks with another, what we hope is interesting topic. Of course, crazy bids will never leave our side. On behalf of the TBBT staff, now frantically trying to figure out what calling of the hogs means. Until next time, kind people, go Gunners, Barracudas, Tigers, Bobcats, and Cubs, and bacon. And we wish you all the best in growing your business.
Talking government procurement with a crazy bill thrown in. The Big Bid Theory.